Hello, everyone, and welcome to the BPHASA and the ARC Michigan PCP webinar series. Just a few reminders while we're waiting for everyone to get logged in. You will receive a link to today's recording as well as a PDF of today's presentation. These will also be updated on our person-centered planning quality improvement project website, and I will also make sure that you get the link to that website as well. Questions can be asked using the Q&A function, and the chat is not working today, so please use the Q&A. And following the webinar, you're going to receive your copies, and we'll just give everyone a few more minutes, Laura, to get logged in, and then we will go ahead and start.
Okay, give me a thumbs up or whatever when we're ready to go.
It is past 3 o'clock, so feel free, Laura, we'll let you go ahead and get started.
All right. Okay, well, welcome everybody, and thank you so much for coming today. I am doing an overview of our new person-centered planning policy. I'm hoping people will be kind of excited about this because we're really trying to ramp up some quality around person-centered planning and make sure that policy that's been in place for quite some time now is really kind of coming into the 21st century. So we will kind of go over person-centered planning in general. We're going to talk a lot about process in this policy. That's really the main difference between this policy and old policies, is that the focus is really about the person-centered planning process, as that has been part of law for decades now. But it seems to have kind of lost its oomph over the years. So knowing the difference between the person-centered planning process and the person-centered process is what we're going to talk about, what the different requirements are, and some final takeaways for you guys. So this is just a snapshot of what it looks like, so you're kind of familiar. If you haven't seen it, it is on the person-centered planning website, which I'm hoping maybe we can have Heather and Marie send out a link with the slideshow, or I'll put one in here because I failed to do that. So apologies, but you'll be able to access that at your leisure. And if you would click on it a whole bunch, I really want it to get to the top of the Google search. So I'd appreciate your help with that. So really quickly, some of the terms, and these are just very short and sweet. Key terms, and these are off of the definitions that are in the end of the policy. Making sure that we understand when we talk about independence, productivity, and community inclusion. Independence, according to the Medicaid manual, is really about functioning with autonomy, not like I can do this independently. The IPS is what our document of person-centered planning of the process is. Person-centered planning is a kind of umbrella term. So, and really a key to good person-centered planning is understanding that the keys to self-determination, which really reflect that independence, productivity, and community inclusion, are really the basis for what we're trying to do. Self-determination is now, we're calling it, it's definitely still very much entwined with self-direction, but we're making a slight differentiation so that people understand that we're really talking about people being able to drive their own services in life, whereas self-directed services are really about being able to use Medicaid dollars to purchase your own services and supports and have more choice and control. The person-centered process, which we'll get into a little bit, is also known as a person-centered practice. So this is really for the entire time that a person is getting services. There should be a collaborative, ongoing person-centeredness. So it's not just one time a year somebody gets to have real choice and control and make decisions about what's going to happen in their life, but the entire time that they're in services, we should be supporting them to kind of drive what's going on and make decisions about what's going to happen in their life. And then treatment plan is really going to be defined as really that medical document. So specifically, when you have an occupational treatment plan, occupational therapy treatment plan, physical therapy treatment plan, it's really a medical document. So those things go under the umbrella of the IPOS, the person-centered plan, but they are not the person-centered plan. And then productivity is really about being skilled, knowing that you're good at something, having a knack for something, trying to build on productivities, not necessarily, hopefully not like some of us were trained about productivities, how many hours you can get in, to make sure that you're billing, but really about making sure that a person understands that they do have a skill and they have something that they're good at. So real quick, we'll kind of go through some of the basis for the policy. So like I had said, for decades now, it has been law that a person-centered planning process is used to develop the written plan of services. And this should be done in partnership with the person. So again, that kind of goes back to the idea of the person-centered process that's continuous. And it's not just an event, but the whole time that the person receives services. And then since the HCBS final rule came through, basically the rules that we're going by now is that you can't use federal funds, you can't use Medicaid dollars without having a person-centered service plan. So if you basically want to use Medicaid dollars, that person-centered plan through that person-centered process has to happen. So if we want to have good person-centered planning in Michigan, we have to understand that, like we just talked about, person-centered planning is the law. It is a process. It's not just about the document. It is person-directed. It is based in self-determination, and it's strength-based, positive, and supported. So we talk about a lot about our individual plan of service, and we want to make sure that people understand that that plan, as as far as law goes, in federal language, they talk about a person-centered service plan. In Michigan, we call that plan the IPOS, but that plan must be person-centered. So the umbrella of person-centered planning that eventually leads to this document called the IPOS includes both of these things that I talked about, both of these processes. So the person-centered process, again, that's kind of continual and ongoing, and then the person-centered planning process, which is really the time period that you're specifically talking about planning. And the reason that we separated kind of these three terms, even though they're kind of all intertwined again, is really because in policy, not only our state policy, but in federal language, there's references to both the person-centered process and the person-centered planning process. And there's been terminology about starting the person-centered planning process and restarting the person-centered planning process and ending the person-centered planning process, and things like that. So if we're not really clear about our terms and what each of those means, it can be confusing as to what part of planning you're in, what it means to restart a process or end a process. So that's why we have all of those things up under the umbrella term of person-centered planning. Oh, I jumped a slide. So now we're going into the actual person-centered process. And this is pretty much at the beginning of the document and really describes, what it is, how it works, and why it's part of the policy. So that's that page. So like we had talked about many times now, this process is ongoing. So you want to make sure that when people come into services, that they're really, you're learning about that person's learning about services, about, how all this works, hopefully learning about person-centered planning and how that is supposed to work so that they have some advocacy in understanding their own rights and what is to be expected as they move through the system. There should be a continuous feedback loop where every time you're meeting with people, every time they get a service, they're able to kind of talk about, am I moving closer to where I want to be? How's it going? Is there anything about the plan that we have now that needs to be adapted, etc. Um, they use your assessments to kind of inform this process, the planning process, and what will happen through services. Pre-planning is really a robust time where, depending on how that person wants to move forward with their planning process, they can do as much or as little in that period of time as they want or need. So um, because we've had a document that's basically a checklist, sometimes pre-planning is looked at as kind of this really quick and, where do you want your plan? Who do you want to come? What are we going to talk about? And then you're done. But really that pre-planning time is about really exploring, what it is that person wants to accomplish, what kind of things that they want to do with their life, what it is overall, where they hope to go, and how they're going to achieve that. So being able to really look at um, whatever it is that they want to do in their life, how those supports can facilitate that. That's kind of the discussion that should be going on in that planning. And not only the supports that are paid, but resources in the community, um, people that, natural supports and people around them that can support them, basically trying to come up with some solutions about how to help this person, be able to achieve whatever it is they're trying to achieve. Then those meetings, again, even though we're in the planning phase, it's still part of the overall person-centered process. So those meetings there could be one annually, there could be many. Um, those meetings can be a celebration of whatever it is that was achieved through the pre-planning phase. But it's really up to the individual and their planning team um, to really kind of drive all of that and make sure that those meetings are done and that they're really driven by the person as much as possible. And then your basic implementation and monitoring. So once that plan is written and services have started, making sure that everything's going well, that if any changes need to be made, they're made, and really kind of testing that plan to see if it's getting us where we want to go and making changes when needed. So the the person-centered process, or sometimes called that person-centered practice, is really based in helping that person to have control over their own life, to drive their life. If you think about it from an equity lens, I guess we're really trying to help the populations that we serve really kind of get onto an equal rung of a ladder, right? So because of either mental illness or disability, um, people have not had the same opportunities as other people. So we're looking for, how do we make accommodations? How do we give people supports? How do we get people to a place where they have an equal footing to live a life like anybody else? So we're really trying to kind of figure all this out with the person and not really doing anything to the person or for the person, but really having them kind of lead us and being able to support them to do whatever it is they're trying to do. And then really looking at throughout this, we're behavioral health. So behavior is a huge piece of helping people get wherever they need. So looking for that behavior, understanding what it is, why it's happening, that the environment really is impacting what this person's behaviors are. So if there's a way to, instead of trying to make somebody change their behavior, you can actually change the environment so that that behavior doesn't happen. Sometimes that's a solution, but you're always looking for positive solutions to help that person move forward. So, as I had said, self-determination is really the basis for person-centered planning. So if you're not looking at, that's why we have in medical necessity, promoting independence, community inclusion, and productivity. Those things are the basis of self-determination theory. Um, so you really want the process to be able to provide the information and support to ensure that the individual directs their process to the maximum extent possible and is enabled to make informed choices and decisions. And that's from the HCBS final rule. So if we're not supporting people, we're not giving them the information they need to make good choices. If we're not promoting that self-determination, then we're not really um, upholding the standards of person-centered planning. So really thinking about when you're having discussions, who's controlling the conversation? How do we help the person kind of think about their life in a way that they can kind of take the lead and maybe even facilitate their own planning meetings in the future. That would ultimately be the best example of self-determination for person-centered planning. So we have Medicaid funded service and supports that must be integrated in and fully support access to the community. And that's again another HCBS final rule. So thinking about, as you go through the person-centered process, how do you support the person to do this? So that is a kind of newer rule for person-centered planning, but a really important one. And because the people we support have these greater needs, we need to really be thinking about this all the time. So that's kind of the overall idea of person-centered practice or the person-centered process. And now we'll move into the person-centered planning process. So I used to kind of talk about if you don't know how to make your own choices in life, someone else will make those choices for you. So this is kind of the same idea, right? If you don't have a really good plan for building a great life, you'll fall into someone else's plan. So we need to help people be able to make solid plans on their own so that they don't end up, you know, living someone else's plan out for them. So this is a section of the policy about the person-centered planning process. Again, just giving you kind of a picture of it. And so hopefully you guys will be able to check it out when you get that link to the person-centered planning website. But I just wanted you to kind of see what it looked like. So obviously this part of the process is focused on planning. So planning really needs to have the foundation of knowing who that individual is, understanding what their needs and preferences are. So you can see where the foundation of our golden rule, which is, putting together our assessments, our information, getting to know the person, and going all the way into and through the pre-plan and then to medical necessity so that we can actually use those Medicaid dollars to pay for things. These things all start to come together. So without getting to really know the person and understand them, it's going to be difficult to come up with a very good plan for them. Understanding what their needs are and the possible solutions for how to get those needs met is part of preparing for this planning piece, and making sure that whatever solutions and accommodations are addressed through this planning process, this is the time to do it. So and then At a federal level, they talk a lot about people co-designing their plans, and I really like that terminology. So, um, really think about as we go through, like really working again. If you're working with somebody, then you're kind of co-designing. If you're hired to build something for somebody, right? You're not really working with them, you're kind of doing it for them. So, um, again, really making sure that there's a partnership. Um, as we saw in the beginning, that is literally written into the law that we partner with people to design these plans. So, in all the policies for person-centered planning, including this one, we have some requirements. So there's kind of three sections. There's these kind of general requirements, which are just kind of like we do these things around person-centered planning, and I'll get to them in a second. And then there's evidence-based requirements. So you have to show that you did certain things. And then there's I'm gonna forget the last one. I'd have to skip real forward real quick. Oh, the components of the plan, sorry. Um, so the things that actually need to go into that plan. So the first part is really kind of these general requirements where the PIHP has to make sure that everybody is trained on person-centered planning. And this really goes, this is not new. I think people thought it was new, but really the PIHP has a requirement to not only make sure like that your case manager support coordinators and the people who are kind of responsible for writing these plans are trained on person-centered planning, but also their admin staff, they're supposed to be training for community members. So there's a part of the contract where the PIHPs need to reach out to parts of their community and have a joint responsibility for the people they serve, and figure out how people in the community can also help support. So through those community mental health agencies, literally why they're called community mental health is because it is supposed to be a partnership with the community. So if you have good partnerships with your community, you're going to be better able to serve the people in that community. So really making sure that people really understand what person-centered planning is, even beyond just inside that CMH. There's a requirement to gather data on relationships and community connections. I'm pretty sure this is somewhat new with the HCBS final rule, but really making sure that people are, we're taking, the community connection piece of this seriously. So our home and community-based services really need to be community-based. So we want to make sure that people actually have a relationship with the people in their community, that they're not isolated and kind of stuck at home. There's a requirement to promote and support the use of independent facilitators, a requirement to have dignity of risk, which is, for all intents and purposes, really about balancing choice. So, really, we're talking about if somebody wants to try something, that there might be a risk. Maybe somebody has cut themselves, trying to cook before or something. And so now people are very skittish about letting that person ever use a knife, for example. Well, if that person says, well, I really like to learn how to cook, but in order to do that, I have the risk of hurting myself because I might have to chop up some carrots or whatever. Figuring out how to make that happen for that person, making any accommodations that might be needed, to make sure that that person can actually do that task instead of just avoiding it. That's what dignity at risk is. So again, that's not new, but hoping that we've explained it a little bit better to people so they understand how it works. We're documenting how the individual has chosen to utilize their services to meaningfully participate and contribute to their community. So again, pretty heavily based on those community ties and community connections. So some people do prefer to be kind of more on their own, but there has to be um, some evidence as to how, that person wants to be a part of their community. This requirement of the document isn't necessarily in that piece of the plan that's in the IPOS, but just that there's a document somewhere that talks about that. Doesn't mean it couldn't be, but we don't want to overload the plan with so much stuff that it's impossible to read either. So the person-centered planning process, or I'm sorry, the person-centered process is used to promote and increase self-determination. And then just the general ones beside that is, follow the person-centered planning policy, that people have the rights to appeal, that we presume competence, that we're strength-based, and that we honor people's cultural preferences. Those are pretty basic over the course of person-centered planning policy. So the required evidence is also very familiar. All the pre-planning activities about, like I had said earlier, where do you want your meeting to be? Who do you want to be there? What are we going to talk about? All of those things. But you want to make sure that we show that the individual actually chose those things, and not that you just went through the checklist and said, oh, I think we'll meet at my office at a time convenient to me. That's kind of the point of the document and the evidence. So again, showing that if somebody does have a risky thing that they want to try, that there's some evidence that either their choice was honored and they were able to do that thing, or that if there was any kind of accommodations. So my example earlier about if somebody wanted to learn how to cook, but you're worried about them getting cut, then we make a deal that whenever you cut something, you're going to wear one of those protective gloves. So just, making sure that there's evidence that choice was, whatever safety or health risk is dealt with. There's a requirement about how many times a year the person chooses to have periodic reviews. If there's a reduction or termination in services, there needs to be that adverse benefit determination sent out. And, the individual must agree to plan in writing, which again is not new. And then we go into those components I was talking about. So this is the component section, and at least the beginning of the list for that. And I don't think I listed all of them, but some of the more interesting ones. The plan must have a narrative description of what was discussed at the meeting. This did not say narrative description before. So really, again, to really get that golden thread complete, we want to see that, whatever was in the assessment, and then going into the pre-plan, and then actually in the plan, if you have this narrative, it really helps tie all of that together and make sure that it's really in the person's control and coming from them, instead of maybe something that was decided by somebody outside of that person-centered planning team. So in this component, it talks about the strengths, needs, abilities, preferences, hopes, interests, and natural supports also being included in the IPOS. Again, I don't think that's changed at all, but still in there. All the paid and unpaid resources that will be used to achieve the goals of the plan. This is really, I don't know, I guess historically, some CMHs have been pretty good about writing in unpaid resources, and I guess got kind of bit, for lack of better words, for doing so. So if there was a situation where it was like Uncle Larry was going to mow the lawn to make sure that, whoever didn't get kicked out of their apartment or something, and then Uncle Larry failed to do that, somebody was coming after the CMH to say, why didn't you make sure that Uncle Larry didn't mow the lawn? And and that's unfortunate because this is and has been part of the person-centered planning policy for a long time. And it really is important to have kind of those natural resources available for people to be able to complete and achieve the goals of their plan. Um, because the idea ultimately, right, is to get people out of needing CMH supports. Um, so kind of doing a hybrid model, and like I had said earlier about making sure that people are included in their community. It's hard to do that if all you're doing is relying on services. So understand that person-centered planning is really about a real life, and whatever those life goals are, the services are there to support them, not that the plan is there to support the services. So the whole idea is that we're going through that process and figuring out what's most important to them and for the person, and putting that into a plan that people can agree on, and really trying to make that come to fruition as much as possible. Um, so anyway, um, the setting is that's the HCBS rule that basically says where the person lives, that they chose the setting that they're living in. And if they don't want to live there anymore, that they have a choice to go somewhere else. I think a lot of people in their EMR have put some kind of checklist in their IPOS to kind of deal with this requirement. And again, that golden thread that we were talking about, there actually is a rule about, let's see if I remember exactly what it said, probably not, but the basics of it says that you have to show that you are not authorizing any supports or services that are not needed, which, as you can guess from how that's phrased, would probably be difficult to document what's not, right? There's probably way more things that are not than are. And so ultimately that requirement was flipped. So instead of saying what it should not be, we said what it should be. And the way to make sure that no services that are not needed, right, are not authorized, we said use the golden thread, right? So make sure that it's documented that, there was an assessment, that there were recommendations made in that assessment, that those recommendations were used to inform the plan, that the person was able to drive that planning process and choose the services that they thought they needed in order to meet the life goals of their plan. And then complete, that whole thing with a narrative of what happened in that planning meeting, your periodic reviews, etc. That kind of completes that golden thread. So the medical necessity that's already kind of built into our process is really what's going to show that you're only authorizing services that are needed. Then we get into any restrictions that the person might have, need to be documented in the plan. And it's important to make sure that the person understands what those restrictions are and how to, if they want to get rid of those restrictions, what would have to be done. So we don't want to get into the habit of writing something in as a restriction and then having that necessarily drive, that person's life forever. Again, ideally, if there is a way for a person to kind of graduate out and not need our services anymore, that would be ideal. So not just writing in a restriction and saying this is just going to be here forever because that's the way it is. And I understand that there are some things that because of a person's diagnosis or disability that maybe they are considered more permanent, but being able to think about if there are any alternatives, if there's a way to solve that problem in a different way, um, that's kind of what you want to do and make sure that that person, as much as they can, understands, what that restriction is and potentially how to get out of it because they themselves might have some ideas of something else that could be done. And lastly, want to make sure that any service that the person is choosing to self-direct is included in the plan of service, as well as an estimated cost of service, which is the kind of a lot of people talk about it being an explanation of benefits, but it's really the um, ultimate cost of all the services in the plan. And that gives us kind of the top of the budget for the person to be able to potentially use for self-directing their services. So we want to make sure that all of those components are included in the plan and accessible to the individual. And then lastly, the last piece, and this is just cut right from the policy, is the dispute resolution piece. So since the last person-centered planning policy was written, we've added a mediation tool. So you can follow the mediation as defined in the mediation mental health dispute technical requirement, if that's something that somebody would like to use. So I believe that that's probably the newest piece, and both the appeal and grievance resolution and the mediation and the mental health dispute technical requirement. There's links in there to the both of those documents. So if anybody ever has any questions on how to get to them or where to go to look, those things are there. So finally, just general person-centered planning tips and takeaways. Your medical necessity, if you think about increasing, sustaining, maintaining independence, productivity, community inclusion, it's really based on the self-determination theories of autonomy, competence, and relatedness. So autonomy is really that independence piece we're talking about. Competence in this sense is really what that productivity. So knowing that you do something well, that you have a skill, and relatedness is that community inclusion piece. So making sure that people really have a place that they feel like they belong, that they have people they care about and people that care about them. That's really what really needs to be built into that plan. So we make sure that we're building blocks of psychological wellness for everybody and that they can be the best person that they can be. Then we want to make sure, again, the services in that plan are there to support that person's life and that the plan itself is not just there to support the person. So really when writing these plans, we want to make sure we stay away from like eligibility goals, things that say like, I want to live in my AFC. Well, that's great, but it's not a goal. Like, unless somebody's trying to kick you out of your AFC, you're probably going to stay there whether you do things that make your life better or not. So we want to stay person-centered, find out what's important for and to the person, use all those strengths, needs, abilities, and preferences to really look for the things that motivate a person, use those to write people's goals, and then use objectives to get the person closer to whatever it is that their life goal is. And then the amount, scope, and duration for those objectives and the things that make those goals those goals measurable are the objectives. So amount, scope, and duration, It can be in the objective, but really we're trying to make sure that those amount, scope, and durations are related to the service and not the objective. So we want to see that, in order for somebody to reach their life goal, they need to do X, Y, and Z. And in order for them to do X, Y, and Z, they are going to be supported by, I don't know, med reviews quarterly, for an hour or whatever for the duration of their year. And so that usually can go in the interventions or methodology section. And let's see, I already talked about eligibility does not need to be justified in a goal. So, and then basically your tips to drive your person-centered planning process, keep that person in the driver's seat, really look for needs that people have around like that autonomy, relatedness, and productivity. So really looking for, is this person able to communicate well so that other people know what their needs are? Is this person, do they have good relationships? Do they feel like they belong? Is there a place that we can look to help that, or give them a better sense of belonging? Things like that. So preferences we talk about a lot. People tend to think if you write, somebody wants to do something, then you've captured their preferences. But preferences are really about, how a service will be delivered. So it can be a very important, for example, for somebody to have a certain type of food that they eat, or it's something as simple as how people want their coffee in the morning, right? Everybody has different preferences of, or even if they like coffee, or that maybe they don't want coffee at all, maybe they want something else in the morning to give them their caffeine, or they don't want caffeine at all. So those are kind of the things you want to talk about. Typically, a service is delivered in X way. Is there anything about the way that that service is delivered that you would like tailored individually to you? And then, if you don't really know what's most important to the person, you really can't, do these preferences. You really can't keep the person in the driver's seat. So, um, if you have trouble connecting with an individual, go with what is important to people in general. So again, self-determination principles are important to all human beings. So really looking for that in everything you do will help keep people in that person-centered process. And make sure that you're checking in on progress, and make sure to allow the individual to try something else if something's not working or they just want to make a change. um, be able to kind of go with that and see where it leads, because it's all kind of a big journey. So let's see. And that is the general overview of the policy. And I'm hoping that we focus more on our process and less on our documentation. Not that that's not important. Make sure that we get those requirements in, do that little work once a year. Then all year round, we do the good work of keeping that person driving their services and their life. So what questions do you have for me?
We did get a couple of questions so far. So remember, if you have a question, please put it in the Q&A. The first question is pre-planning required in policy for all ages and populations? Like, I'm guessing that's related to formal pre-planning.
Yeah. So pre-planning is required for everybody except for meds only and short-term outpatient therapy. And again, think about, because this is all individualized, right? Person-centered planning, those meetings, the pre-planning and everything is individually tailored. So if somebody is saying, I want to have 12 people at my pre-planning meeting or whatever, or if they're saying, you know what, I just want to get my meeting done, let's get through this, that's still pre-planning. But the general default to like, let's just get this form done and do the checklist and make sure that we have all that, taken care of, like, shouldn't be the default. So if you maybe work with people with mental illness, or I know that CCBHC folks, for example, have been kind of reluctant, I guess, to follow, the full person-centered planning guide. I think that, being able to be flexible and meet the person where they're at is really more important than, how long or how many people what if you do a quote unquote full process or not. That's what I think a lot of people were saying. Why do we have to go through a full process? Well, a full process is as long or short as the person desires. So
Thank you. So you mentioned CCBHC. How does this policy interface with the CCBHC services?
CCBHC has to follow the same policies. So the person-centered planning policy does apply to CCBHC.
Thank you. The next question is related to the narrative that you described of the planning meeting. And does the narrative description of the meeting have to be in the plan document itself, or can that narrative of the meeting be found in, say, a service note?
It should be in the plan. I guess if there's something that, leads you to the note, but generally you want to really, this is not, you're not writing a novel. It's just a kind of high level summary of what actually happened in that meeting. And so it really, like I said, kind of ties everything together to show that the things in that plan actually have come from, the meeting with the person and how that person drove that planning process. So it should be in that plan. I realize that maybe some EMRs don't have room for it, or you might have to recycle a box at this point in time, but just as long as there's somewhere that kind of describes what happened during that meeting, that's enough.
Thank you. I don't see any questions right now, so if anyone does have any questions, please feel free to put them in the Q&A. And as a reminder, we will send out a recording of this webinar and a copy of the slide deck to all participants following the conclusion of today's presentation. Oh, I see another question. Does the individual have to sign their IPOS?
The individual or the person responsible for that individual. So if they have a guardian, then the guardian can sign. I would, especially, if you have children, for example, as they get closer to turning 18, I highly encourage to have that child sign along with their parents, for example. So anytime, the guardian is responsible for signing, but if you can get that person to sign along with them, it really is supposed to be their plan, not the guardian's plan. So while legally that guardian's signature is the signature you need, it makes a clear indication that that person owns that plan if they're able to sign as well. So I guess most of the answer is yes. The person should sign the plan.
Yeah, and I'll just add in there, especially when an individual has restrictions in their plan of service, even if they have a guardian sign it, the signature of the individual served shows informed consent for the restrictions. So that's one thing that is a requirement as related to restrictions for home and community-based services rule. And so I would strongly, like Laura said, I think the first step is really to try and get the person to sign the plan of service, regardless if they have a guardian or not.
Thank you both. I don't see more questions, so we'll give it just a minute. And if not, we'll give everybody back a few minutes of their day. Heather, have you seen anything that I missed?
Sorry, I was still muted. No, I have not seen any more questions coming in. And just to remind everyone that we will have this webinar as well as our past webinars up on our website, and I will make sure that that goes out with the PDF from today, so that if you want to share that, or if you want to share some past webinars with other people in your team, you are more than welcome to do that from our website. I'm still not seeing any other questions, but Laura's contact information is there. And again, you will get a copy of that contact information when we send that out. So I think we are okay to end today's webinar. Thank you all for attending, and thank you, Laura, so much for presenting today.
Thank you. Have a good one.
Bye.